Hi guys, welcome back to History for Sleep. What if I told you that in Edo, Japan, same-sex love wasn't hidden in shame, it was part of everyday life. Samurai formed deep bonds with younger companions, celebrated in poems and codes of loyalty. Kabuki actors, beautiful men playing women, became objects of desire for nobles and merchants alike. In the floating world of Edo's pleasure districts, intimacy between men was written about, painted, and even sold not as scandal, but as art. So when did it all change? When did acceptance turn to silence? Do you think Edo, Japan was more open than we are today? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me the time you're watching. If you love history that breaks old assumptions, subscribe, no pressure. But the next story dives even deeper. They told you samurai fought only with steel, but in Edo, Japan, the sharpest battles were sometimes waged with poetry, perfume, and glances that lasted a heartbeat too long. You picture stoic warriors sharpening their blades, vowing loyalty to their lords. But in Edo, Japan, those same hands sometimes wrote love poems to other men. The floating world was not just about pleasure, it was about masks, mirrors, and secret desires hiding in plain sight. You arrive in Edo, early 18th century today. You'd call it Tokyo. But back then, it was a city that never slept. Lanterns flicker along narrow canals, the air thick with sake incense, and the faint hum of shamisen strings drifting from behind paper screens. The people call this the ukiyo, the floating world, a place where rules bend like willow branches, and where love is as fleeting as the cherry blossoms that carpet the streets each spring. You pass by a samurai, staggering slightly from too much sake, arm in arm, with a young boy in silken robes whose hair is shaved in a curious way, the front gone the back, tied neatly. A wakashu, they call him. You'll learn more about him later. But for now, all you know is that everyone pretends not to see. You think you've stumbled into something scandalous, but in Edo, nobody bats an eye. The floating world was a city within a city, its heart beating loudest in Yoshiwara, the government-licensed pleasure district. But it wasn't just courtesans behind those screens. It was a marketplace of beauty fantasy and forbidden emotion. Samurai merchants, monks, actors, all could walk the same streets. They're momentarily equal under the paper lantern light. Imagine if Wall Street brokers, movie stars, and monks all hung out in the same Vegas bar, and no one thought it strange. That's Edo for you. Behind the laughter and the scent of grilled eel, something deeper brewed. The people of Edo were obsessed with impermanence, the idea that nothing lasts. So they chased beauty where they could find it, even if it came with shame or secrecy. Pleasure wasn't a sin, it was a philosophy. When you read ukiyo today, it sounds like decadence, but for them, it meant savoring the moment before it vanished. And oh, how they savored it. The courtesans, known as oiran, were celebrities, but so too were the wakashu, the androgynous youths, who became icons of desire for both men and women. The ukiyo-e artists carved their images into woodblocks, and entire trends spread through the city based on who wore which pattern of kimono, or whose fan carried which poem. You could say they were Edo's influencers long before Instagram. Still, this wasn't just a story about indulgence. It was about roles, gender power, and expression. You see, Edo, Japan operated on a strict social hierarchy, but inside Yoshiwara, those rules melted away. A samurai might serve tea to a courtesan. A monk might fall for an actor. A lord might write poetry to a boy apprentice. Everyone played roles, and in the floating world roles could be rewritten. The beauty of it all was how art disguised what society could not say out loud. Lovers wrote haiku about the moon instead of desire. They exchanged fans or carved secret symbols into pipes. Painters like Suzuki Harunobu and Kitagawa Utamaro filled their prints with subtle hints, a lingering glance, a robe slipping off one shoulder, a hand holding another just a moment too long. You might not notice at first glance, but once you do, you can't unsee it. And while Western Europe in the same period was criminalizing homosexuality, Edo treated it more like a fashion trend, a practice shaped by art, not condemned by law. Buddhist monks spoke of same-sex bonds as reflections of spiritual affection, while samurai saw them as proofs of loyalty. It was complex, yes, but it wasn't shameful. The line between admiration mentorship and intimacy was paper thin, and no one was in a rush to define it. Still, the floating world had its own contradictions. For all its openness, it was built on illusions. The laughter was rehearsed, the makeup thick, the secrets many. Every pleasure had its price. Beneath the fan dances and laughter, a quiet melancholy lingered, because in a city where everything was fleeting, love was just another performance. You step deeper into Yoshiwara, following the smell of roasted chestnuts. A poet stumbles past you, muttering verses about the moon reflected in a sake cup. And suddenly, you realize the floating world wasn't a rebellion against society. It was society reflected back in silk and shadow. It was Japan's most human face, painted in fleeting moments of connection and desire. And at the center of that world stood a figure unlike any other, the wakashu who blurred the line between youth and adulthood, between man and woman, between devotion and love itself. You notice him again, the wakashu gliding through the crowd like a wisp of smoke. His silken sleeves sway as he walks, his voice soft but steady, his posture perfectly poised between confidence and grace. You can't quite decide if he's boy or man, beautiful or dangerous, and maybe that's the point. In Edo, Japan, the wakashu lived in that in-between space where desire and identity blended like ink on wet paper. To understand him, you have to unlearn everything you think you know about gender. In Edo, masculinity and femininity weren't a rigid binary. They were roles, costumes, sometimes even professions. The wakashu was the third role, the space between recognized by law, celebrated in art, and desired by both sexes. His distinctive hairstyle, a shaved forelock, long hair flowing in the back, marked him instantly. That shaved patch was more than fashion. It was social punctuation, a signal that said, I am still becoming. In a society that prized hierarchy and control, this becoming was thrilling and terrifying all at once. The wakashu was young enough to be admired without scandal, but not so young as to seem childish. He stood at the threshold of manhood, and that threshold was where many in Edo found beauty. You can almost picture a samurai watching him perform a dance at a tea house, torn between admiration and something deeper he would never name out loud. Even Confucian scholars, those stern guardians of virtue, wrote about the wakashu as part of Edo's moral landscape. They disapproved, of course, but even their disapproval reads like fascination. Manuals of etiquette warned older men to avoid excessive fondness for beautiful youths, as though they knew resistance was already a lost cause. The wakashu weren't powerless objects of desire, though. Many were performers, actors, apprentices, or courtesans in their own right. Some gained fame, wealth, and influence, an odd kind of independence in a world that usually denied such things to anyone without rank. They were both admired and envied. You might call them the pop stars of their age. Their portraits sold on woodblocks, their hairstyles copied by the fashionable. There's a famous print by Tori Kiyonaga that captures this perfectly. Three wakashu leaning over a balcony, their robes rippling with patterns of cranes and plum blossoms, laughing as they look down on the street below. The image is innocent at first glance, but look closer, those gazes are no deliberate. The artist was playing a quiet game with the viewer, inviting admiration, but also complicity. And yes, women admired them too. Edo women often spoke of the wakashu as ideal partners, gentler than men, more attentive, less bound by pride. The same traits that made them desirable to men made them objects of fascination to women. In fact, women sometimes dressed as wakashu to enjoy the same freedoms, a subtle act of rebellion wrapped in elegance. It's easy to romanticize all this from the outside, but the truth was more complicated. For every famous wakashu painted by Hokusai or serenaded by a samurai poet, there were many others who lived short, uncertain lives. The transition to adulthood was irreversible once that forelock was shaved off completely. He became a man, and the admiration vanished. Overnight, he could go from adored to invisible. You might compare it to the way modern fame fades with age. One day, your face is on every billboard, the next, you're just another passerby. Still, for those brief years, the wakashu occupied a place of power, hidden inside vulnerability. They embodied beauty as a kind of social currency, trading affection for survival art, for acceptance. When you think of them walking through the crowded night streets of Edo lantern light, catching the edge of their sleeves, you realize they were symbols of an age that prized ephemerality above all else. There's something hauntingly modern about that, isn't there? Today, we chase filters and perfection curating versions of ourselves for fleeting approval. The wakashu did the same, but with fans instead of phones, silk instead of pixels. Both lived by attention, and both knew it could disappear at any moment. A samurai might compose a poem about his beloved wakashu, comparing him to the first plum blossoms of spring, fragile, intoxicating, and doomed to fall. The affection wasn't always secret. Records survive of lords granting gifts, poems, even lands to favored companions. It wasn't romance in the modern sense, but it was love, as Edo understood it, a disciplined devotion wrapped in beauty and duty. When you walk past an old print shop in modern Tokyo and see those faded ukiyo-e faces framed behind glass, you're not just looking at art, you're looking at ghosts of that world. Each delicate stroke of ink preserves a moment when society allowed something fluid, ambiguous, and profoundly human to exist. And somewhere beyond the laughter of Edo's pleasure quarters, another kind of devotion was taking shape, one that would bind warriors together not with silk and poetry, but with honor and loyalty that sometimes looked very much like love. You hear the clang of metal long before you see the courtyard. The air smells like sweat and iron, and the rhythmic thud of practice swords fills the morning. You're standing in the training grounds of a samurai estate, watching young warriors bow strike bow again. Every move is precision, every breath measured. And yet behind all that discipline, something deeply emotional hides something that Edo society would never fully admit, but never quite deny either. Among these, samurai love between men was not taboo, it was a lesson. The code of Bushido spoke of loyalty, courage, and honor, but it also left space for nanshoku male love. In a world where one's life could be over by sundown affection wasn't weakness, it was proof of trust. Some even believed that only a man who could devote himself fully to another could be truly loyal to his lord. It sounds strange to modern ears, doesn't it? Imagine your boss today saying a good worker must know the art of emotional loyalty. You'd probably file an HR complaint. But in Edo, Japan, it was an admired virtue. Warriors called it shudo, the way of the youth, a system of mentorship and intimacy between a young wakashu and his older protector, the ninja. This wasn't some secret affair whispered in alleys. It was often open and written about. Samurai composed poems to their partners comparing the bond to cherry blossoms, beautiful precisely because it would fade. Some even performed rituals, exchanging vows and gifts much like marriage. And yes, this was the same culture that preached discipline above all else. Paradoxical, absolutely. But Edo loved paradoxes. It lived on them. Take, for instance, the story of Nanshoku Okagami, a famous 17th century anthology that collected tales of samurai devotion. In one of its most beloved stories, a young warrior named Shirogoro sacrifices himself in battle after promising eternal loyalty to his companion. His death is treated as noble, his devotion as divine. The moral wasn't that love made him weak, it made him honorable. Think of it this way. Samurai culture believed that controlling one's emotions was power. To feel love and still serve your duty was seen as the ultimate act of self-mastery. That's what made Shudo so different from what Westerners later labeled as immorality. In the West, same-sex affection was forbidden. In Edo, it was codified, aestheticized, ritualized. Of course, not every samurai followed this path. Many didn't, but those who did left behind letters, diaries, and poems that reveal a tenderness often erased from their image. One samurai wrote to his companion, "When I see your face before battle, I feel no fear. If I must die, may it be in your arms." That's not the voice of a cold warrior. It's the voice of a human being caught between blade and feeling. The dynamic between mentor and youth wasn't just emotional, it was moral. The ninja was supposed to guide the wakashu toward adulthood, teaching him courage, poetry, etiquette, and yes, restraint. If the relationship became physical, it was governed by strict etiquette. Consent mattered. Betrayal was shameful. The young man's eventual transition to adulthood marked the honorable end of the relationship, not scandal. And while this may sound like contradiction, love framed as discipline, it was exactly that paradox that made it thrive. In Edo's world, where even art followed rules, and pleasure followed rituals, affection was another form of ceremony. To love beautifully was to live beautifully. You can almost picture it now, two samurai kneeling side by side in a quiet garden after training cherry petals falling around them. One pours tea for the other, their conversation polite, almost formal. Yet beneath that calm surface emotion stirs like a koi beneath still water. There's devotion there, not the kind you post on social media, but the kind that could follow you into battle. Even Buddhist monks wrote about these bonds, arguing that love between men could sharpen the soul, much like friction sharpens a blade. The idea was that affection, like sword training, required discipline, respect, and balance. Lose control, and you lose yourself. Maintain harmony, and you find enlightenment. Of course, not everyone in Edo viewed this with approval. Critics called it indulgence. Reformers worried it distracted from duty, but for generations it endured woven into the rhythm of samurai life, protected by unspoken understanding. You could punish a man for treason, but not for love. In a way, Shudo was Japan's way of reconciling emotion with order. It made space for human tenderness inside an armor of ritual. And in doing so, it left behind stories that challenge how we think about masculinity itself. Maybe strength, it whispers, isn't about the absence of feeling. It's about carrying it quietly honor intact. As night falls over the samurai compound, you can still hear the thud of wooden swords. One apprentice lingers after the others have gone, his teacher correcting his stance with a gentle touch. The air between them hums with something unspoken respect, affection, maybe both. And beyond the walls of the dojo, temples rise in the mist, places where another kind of devotion awaited one, not bound by honor or hierarchy, but by the search for spiritual truth. They say temples are where people go to escape temptation. But in Edo, Japan, some went there to find it. Monasteries weren't just sanctuaries of silence and prayer. They were at times the quiet stage for the most intimate human emotions ever written in brush ink. You climb the stone steps of a temple on Mount He, the mist heavy and cold. Bells toll somewhere beyond the trees, a low rolling hum that seems to settle right into your chest. Monks in saffron robes sweep the courtyard in silence, their sandals scuffing the stones. It all feels peaceful, too peaceful maybe. And yet, beneath that stillness, history whispers. Long before Edo's neon lanterns or samurai oaths, Japan's temples had already woven Nenshoku, or male love, into their spiritual fabric. The earliest records date back to the Heian era, centuries before Edo, when Buddhist monks wrote poems not about divine enlightenment, but about longing glances in the moonlight. Strange, isn't it, how devotion and desire can sometimes sound the same when spoken softly enough. By the Edo period, this practice wasn't hidden. It was almost institutionalized. Many Buddhist sects saw love between men as an extension of compassion, a mirror of divine affection. The mentor-disciple relationship, much like Shudo among the samurai, was built on loyalty and teaching, but it could also blossom into something deeper. The logic went like this: if all attachment is illusion, then love itself is a sacred test. The goal wasn't to suppress desire, but to understand it. You can find it in the writings of monks, like Ikkyu Sojun, a 15th century Zen eccentric, who wrote openly about his experiences mixing humor, lust, and enlightenment in the same breath. He once joked, "Even the Buddha might blush if he met me under the full moon." Edo inherited that tradition of candor. To feel was not sin, it was proof you were alive. Picture it: a monk and his young acolyte sitting beneath temple lanterns, transcribing sutras by candlelight. Outside, the wind rattles the paper doors. Inside, their shoulders brush. Nothing happens, and yet everything does. Theirs was a love defined not by physicality, but by attention, the discipline of noticing someone completely. If that sounds romanticized, remember that Edo's world revolved around restraint. Desire wasn't about indulgence, it was about patience. Where Western theology drew hard lines between sacred and profane, Edo blurred them beautifully. To meditate beside someone you loved was to test your heart, to overcome or to understand that longing was enlightenment in disguise. One of the oldest temples in Kyoto still preserves graffiti carved by anonymous monks centuries ago, haiku, etched into wooden beams. Some are prayers, some are jokes, and a few rare, brief, heartbreaking speak of affection. One reads, "Even my shadow pauses at your passing face under temple bells." Who was he writing about? A fellow monk, a visiting pilgrim? You'll never know. But the emotion survives subtle, disciplined, utterly human. Edo's temples also became quiet patrons of art. Many ukiyo-e prints depicting nanshoku were sold discreetly near temple markets, bought by pilgrims under the same roofs that preached detachment. The irony is deliciously Edo enlightenment and temptation sharing the same incense. You might be wondering, did no one object? Of course some did. Neo-Confucian scholars condemn such intimacy as a moral failing. Yet the Tokugawa government rarely punished it. Why? Because it was woven too deeply into the fabric of Edo's society and accepted contradiction. The same society that could enforce obedience through 1,000 laws could also look the other way when two men found solace beneath temple eaves. There's a legend of a monk named Shorin from the Edo period who wrote that he saw the divine in the curve of another's smile. He was later criticized, but his words endured because they captured something few dared to say out loud, that love, no matter its form, could be holy if it deepened one's understanding of compassion. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel that ancient tension, the heartbeat between prayer beads. The idea that enlightenment might not mean escaping emotion, but facing it fully. To love without possession, to admire without corruption, to desire and yet remain serene. Modern minds might call that hypocrisy. Edo called it harmony. So when you leave the temple and descend into the mist again, you realize something. Love in Edo was never just physical or social, it was philosophical. Whether in a samurai's promise or a monk's poem, affection was treated as a mirror of the self. And down in the city, where paper lanterns flicker and drums echo from a distant theater, another world awaits, a world of masks, makeup, and illusion, where men transform into women, and gender itself becomes performance. You follow the sound of laughter and drums down a narrow alley, where paper lanterns swing in the evening breeze. Ahead, the glow brightens. Voices rise, and you find yourself before a small wooden stage. Edo's theaters were rarely grand. They were rowdy, crowded alive. And tonight, you're about to see one of its greatest illusions, a man becoming a woman, so convincingly that even the gods might do a double take. The performance begins. The curtain parts. A figure steps forward, pale face, painted with delicate blush lips, curved like a brushstroke. He's not a woman, but he might as well be. The crowd holds its breath as he moves fan in hand, every gesture slow and deliberate. This is an onnagata, a male actor trained to embody femininity so fully that his art was considered sacred. Kabuki, after all, wasn't born in temples or palaces, it was born in chaos. In the early 1600s, women first performed it, dancing along riverbanks for crowds of merchants and soldiers. But as the art grew more popular and more provocative, the Tokugawa shogunate banned female performers entirely. Their reasoning too distracting. The irony, of course, was that their replacement young men playing women turned out to be just as distracting, maybe even more so. The onnagata became instant stars. They trained for years to perfect the illusion not to imitate women, but to express the essence of femininity through movement, voice, and emotion. The famous actor Yoshizawa Ayame once said, "An onnagata must not act as a woman would, but as the spirit of womanhood itself." His performances blurred the line so completely that audiences, men and women alike, fell in love with the image he created. You can imagine it. Edo's elite sitting shoulder to shoulder with merchants, everyone transfixed as Ayami glides across the stage, his robes rippling like waves. When his fan snaps open, hearts stop. And when the performance ends, people rush to the backstage doors, hoping for a glimpse of the real person behind the painted mask. And that's where things get complicated. Because the illusion didn't end when the curtain fell. Offstage, the Onagata often lived as the characters they portrayed moving through Edo society in that same feminine grace. Their fame made them untouchable, yet their beauty made them vulnerable. Admirers, both men and women, sent them letters, gifts, poems. Some treated them as lovers, others as muses. In this way, kabuki became more than theater. It became Edo's social laboratory for gender. The audience didn't just watch, they questioned. If a man could embody femininity so perfectly that even emotion obeyed his gestures, what did man or woman even mean anymore? Edo-Era, the city of contradictions, didn't demand an answer. It just applauded. Woodblock artists immortalized these stars in ukiyo-e prints, faces powdered, white eyes heavy with coal hands poised mid-dance. Utamaro Shiraku and Toyokuni all captured the allure of kabuki's performers. Some prints were so popular, they were banned not for obscenity, but for obsession. Fans had begun collecting them with near-religious devotion. Imagine Beatles posters in the 1960s, but woodcut and hand-painted selling for the price of a small fortune. For the Onagata, the price of perfection was steep. They lived in constant balance between identity and performance fame and scrutiny. Some became lovers to wealthy patrons, echoing the Shudo traditions of samurai, but wrapped now in silk and spotlight. Others vanished into obscurity when youth faded the same impermanence that haunted every beauty in Edo. Still, for a brief moment, they held immense cultural power. Through their art, Edo learned to see gender as fluid, performative a concept that would disappear once the West arrived with its rigid moral codes. But here in this crowded, smoky theater, nobody's judging. They're laughing, crying, clapping. They're free if only until the curtain drops. And maybe that's why kabuki survived, when so many other art forms didn't. It was a mirror that reflected everyone's fantasy of love, of beauty, of transformation. When you think about it, it's not so different from modern cinema. The actors change costumes, voices, identities. The audience suspends disbelief. Everyone leaves changed, if only a little. Edo just did it with more eyeliner and better fans. The play ends with thunderous applause. The Onagata bows, eyes lowered, a faint smile on his painted lips. You realize you've just witnessed something more than performance. It's defiance, wrapped in elegance, rebellion, painted in rouge. As the crowd spills out into the lantern-lit streets, you follow, still dazed. You can hear merchants haggling nearby, smell grilled squid from a vendor's cart, feel the humid night pressing against your skin. And then in the distance, you spot something that pulls you from your reverie, a shop window lined with prints, ukiyo-e scenes of lovers, courtesans, and beautiful youths. Their colors still vibrant after centuries, their secrets pressed forever in ink. The shop smells faintly of cedar and ink. Rows of prints hang from thin cords fluttering gently as customers pass. You step inside, and it's like walking into a kaleidoscope of Edo's desires, every wall alive with color, every scene a glimpse into a world that refused to sit still. Here, beauty wasn't just painted. It was multiplied, copied, collected, and hidden beneath floorboards when moral inspectors came knocking. The merchant bows and welcomes you, his hands stained from the pigments of 1,000 prints. You recognize a few names etched in fine calligraphy: Utamaro Harunobu Hokusai, the great ukiyo-e masters who turned fleeting pleasure into something eternal. Most visitors come here for landscapes or portraits of courtesans, but you notice a quieter corner tucked behind a curtain. There, the real treasures lie shunga, or spring pictures. At first glance, they look innocent enough. Lovers in kimonos, courtyards filled with lanterns. But look closer, and you see the coded gestures, the soft brush of hands, the tilt of a head, the glint of eyes that tell stories words were forbidden to say. Some depict couples, others pairs of men, or wakashu admired by both genders. In Edo, desire was never single-directional. It was a compass that spun where it pleased. Artists disguised eroticism within elegance. Harunobu would carve the curve of a robe so that it hinted at intimacy without showing anything scandalous. Hokusai, best known today for his great wave, also produced prints of male-male affection so subtle you might miss them two figures leaning over a scroll, their fingers nearly touching. The viewer was complicit. If you understood, you understood. If not, it was just art. And that's what made ukiyo-e such a perfect reflection of Edo itself. It spoke two languages at once, one public, one private. One for the world of merchants, one for those who live between categories, neither saint nor sinner, neither male nor female, neither fully seen nor completely hidden. The floating world had always loved a secret. The merchant smiles as you linger. He tells you that even the shogunate's officials own these prints, often commissioning their own sets under pseudonyms. It was an open secret that nobody wanted to close. Moral laws were inked in black, but pleasure was printed in color, and color always wins. In one print by Utagawa Toyokuni, two young men sit beside a paper screen painted with cranes. One pours sake, the other leans closer, whispering something only the other will ever hear. It's gentle, human, and utterly without shame. You can almost hear their laughter if you stand still long enough. For Edo's merchants, who lived under strict class limits, these prints were rebellion you could hang on a wall. You couldn't become a samurai, but you could own the same art they admired. You couldn't rewrite your birth, but you could purchase a glimpse of freedom. Ukiyo-e democratized desire. It made beauty available to anyone with a few coins and the nerve to look. You might think of it as Edo's version of cinema posters or social media. Everyone wanted to see who was fashionable, who was scandalous, who was adored. Except instead of paparazzi photos, it was woodblocks, meticulously carved by hand, printed with pigments that still glow after centuries. Utamaro especially loved ambiguity. His portraits of courtesans often carried subtle signs, fans shaped like hearts, hairpins, carved like arrows. Art historians later realized many of his female subjects were actually wakashu, or male actors, painted with deliberate softness. It wasn't deception. It was an aesthetic game. The question wasn't, who is this? But what does beauty mean if it refuses to choose sides? It's easy to assume this world was entirely liberated, but it wasn't. Every color hid its own shadow. When moral reform swept through Edo under shoguns like Tokugawa, Yoshimune artists were forced to disguise their subjects even further. They replaced kisses with poetry, gestures with glances, bodies with symbolism. But censorship only made them cleverer, turning every fan, every cherry blossom, every curve of fabric into a secret language. And that language still speaks. When modern scholars rediscovered Edo's shunga, many were shocked by how open it was, how playful and philosophical. It wasn't pornography, it was commentary. It said, We are all beautiful in ways society cannot name. The merchant carefully wraps one of the prints for you, tying it with string. Handle it gently, he says, or the paper will tear. You wonder if he means the print or the truth it carries. When you step back into the street, the night feels different. The lanterns seem brighter, the laughter louder, as if all of Edo is in on the secret. But beneath that lively surface, change is coming. Whispers of reform, a government tired of indulgence, a moral tightening that would soon turn these quiet prints into contraband. Because beauty, no matter how silent, always threatens power. The streets that once glowed with the shimmer of lanterns now feel dimmer, quieter. Something in the air has shifted. You can sense it in the way merchants speak in hushed tones, how theater troupes suddenly shorten their performances, how printmakers keep their best works tucked beneath the counter. Edo still hums, but the melody has changed. The floating world, so vivid, so unapologetic, is beginning to sink. The year is 1841, and Tokugawa Yoshinobu's reform edicts ripple through the city like a cold wind. Officially, they're about morality. In truth, they're about control. The government calls it the Tempo Reforms, a campaign to restore virtue, frugality, and discipline after years of decadence. But everyone knows what it really means. No more silk too fine, no plays too provocative, no prints too daring. The floating world once celebrated as art is now a threat to order. And with that decree, Edo's secret loves are pushed into the shadows. The courtesans, who once flaunted their beauty, now hide it behind muted robes. The onagata still perform, but the police patrol their theaters, watching for indecency. In those quiet woodblock shops, many burn their stock to avoid arrest. Some artists are imprisoned. Others switch to landscapes, mountains, and rivers, replacing lovers and glances. You can almost feel the sighs trapped between those empty hills in later ukiyo-e prints, as if nature itself were mourning the loss of its human chaos. It's not that love between men suddenly vanished, it simply became invisible. Edo's people, masters of adaptation, found new ways to hide in plain sight. Fans became code again. Poems disguised affection as philosophy. A folded letter might read, "Under the plum blossoms, I find peace," and everyone understood what it meant. But the open laughter, the public ease, the shared performances gone. For the first time in generations, desire felt dangerous. And yet, paradoxically, that danger made it even more intoxicating. Imagine being told the songs you once hummed were now forbidden. You'd whisper them anyway, wouldn't you? You hear stories whispered in tea houses about secret gatherings in the Ryote private inns where the shogunate spies dared not tread. There, under the pretext of poetry readings, small groups met to recite old verses and remember what the city once was. The candles were kept low, the laughter subdued, but for those few hours, the floating world flickered back to life. Among those who resisted the silence was the artist Kuniyoshi, famous for his bold warrior prints. While his contemporaries painted landscapes, he smuggled emotion into battle scenes. Look closely at his work, and you'll see samurai clasping hands as they fall, warriors whose dying gazes lingered just a second too long. It was subtle rebellion love, reimagined as heroism, loyalty, as devotion. He couldn't draw lovers anymore, so he carved them into history instead. That's the thing about repression. It never truly erases anything. It only forces it to evolve. Edo's artists had learned the art of disguise centuries earlier, and they perfected it now. Every crane, every wave, Every plum blossom in their prints carried echoes of what once was. You could outlaw a gesture, but not a feeling. Still, the moral purges took their toll. Theaters closed, performers vanished, and an entire vocabulary of expression was quietly deleted. People began to forget that their grandparents had lived in a city where love could be fluid and art could be dangerous. The floating world, with all its contradictions, was folded into polite silence. If you think that sounds familiar, it should. Every era at some point wages war on its own joy. The more rules are written, the more desire slips between them. Edo was no exception. The harder the shogunate tried to enforce virtue, the more it exposed how fragile that virtue really was. And yet, amid all the censorship, the poets didn't stop writing. One unsigned haiku from that period survives: lanterns forbidden, but moonlight cannot be taxed. He smiles beneath it. You can almost picture the scene: two figures standing by a river, the city's new silence pressing down on them, yet the moon reflecting in both their eyes. Laws can dictate many things, but not that. Edo continued quieter now until Western ships appeared on the horizon, dark silhouettes that would bring with them not just trade, but a new kind of morality. One colder, imported foreign. What the shoguns had begun, the West would finish. But for now, you stand at the edge of a fading world, the last flicker before modernization. You can still hear laughter somewhere in the distance, faint and defiant, like a melody refusing to die. The laughter you heard fades into whispers as you wander deeper into Edo's night. The city feels different now, quieter, older, but still alive in the corners that laws can't reach. You follow the curve of a narrow canal, the reflections of paper lanterns trembling across the water, like secrets trying not to be spoken. Somewhere ahead, faint shamisen strings hum from behind a sliding door. You've arrived at one of the ryote, those discreet tea houses, where the floating world still flickers, refusing to die. Inside, the air smells of tatami incense and wet silk. Men sit cross-legged in low light voices, soft laughter restrained. You notice the coded glances, the subtle tap of a fan, the deliberate brush of a sleeve, the way someone pours sake for another just a moment longer than necessary. Nothing is said, and yet everything is communicated. This is what remains of Edo's forbidden world, the art of suggestion. One man recites a haiku aloud, pretending it's about spring. Two plum blossoms meet amu in the rain's soft hesitation, and part by sunrise. The others smile knowingly. That's how affection survived camouflaged in poetry and etiquette. You could no longer paint love openly, but you could fold it into a verse. You could no longer perform it on stage, but you could slip it between lines of a tea ceremony's polite chatter. The floating world hadn't vanished. It had adapted, trading its bright lanterns for candlelight. Some of the old courtesans and actors found refuge here too, serving tea or playing music under assumed names. A few of the onagata from the great kabuki stages still performed privately, their gestures smaller now, but no less precise. Watching one is like seeing a memory dance a woman's grace, conjured from the movements of a man who has long forgotten where one ends and the other begins. There's a quiet dignity to it all, a kind of rebellion through elegance. You can sense that these people aren't merely clinging to the past, they're protecting it. For them, love is no longer about desire, it's about defiance. Every poem, every fan flick, every whispered compliment is a small refusal to let the world decide what beauty means. You catch sight of a merchant in the corner, middle-aged plain kimono, but his eyes sparkle when the music starts. He leans slightly toward the young musician beside him, his fingers brushing the rim of his sake cup. No one reacts. No one needs to. In this dim, smoky room, everything that once scandalized Edo is simply human. It strikes you how fragile it all is. One wrong word, one suspicious official, and the tea house could be shut down by morning. Yet here they are risking it anyway, for connection, for remembrance, for that moment when the world feels whole again. You start to notice the rhythm of the evening. A poem shared, a round of laughter, another refill of sake. The stories flow. Two tales of vanished theaters, burned prints, lovers who disappeared into exile. One old man, perhaps once a playwright, tells how he kept a banned ukiyo, e-print, hidden behind a scroll of calligraphy for 30 years. They said it was shameful, he chuckles, but I thought it was beautiful. His voice trembles between pride and grief. If you've ever held on to something just because it reminded you who you are, an old letter, a faded photograph, you understand him completely. Edo's people weren't just preserving art, they were preserving identity. Outside, the rain begins. You hear it tapping against the shoji screens, a soft, steady rhythm that makes the tea house feel even more like a dream. The geisha, or what's left of that profession, begin to sing. The melody is old, wistful, and unashamedly romantic. You don't know the words, but you know the feeling. It's the sound of a city remembering itself. When the song ends, the room sits in silence. Someone sighs. Someone pours another drink. You can almost sense that everyone here knows they are living at the end of something, an age, a freedom, maybe even an illusion. But they're not mourning. They're celebrating it softly one last time. As you step back into the rain, the streets shimmer like liquid glass. The scent of incense lingers on your sleeve. Edo is changing, and soon the world will call it Tokyo. The floating world will be buried beneath Western suits and telegraph wires. But tonight, in that hidden tea house, you saw what could not be outlawed, the human hunger to connect, to be seen, to remember love, even when it's forbidden to speak its name. And as the rain falls harder, you look up at the dark sky and think you can erase a law, but you can't erase longing. You can burn a print, but you can't burn memory. And memory in Edo was always stronger than obedience. By the time the rain stops, the world you knew as Edo is already fading. A new sun rises over a city under construction bridges, widened canals, drained street names rewritten in Western syllables. The year is 1868, and the Meiji Restoration has begun. The shogunate is gone, the emperor returned to power, and Japan is sprinting toward modernity like a man late for a train that hasn't been invented yet. You can feel it everywhere. Top knots are being cut off. Samurai shave their heads, trade swords for briefcases. The kabuki actors are ordered to reform their immoral art. Woodblock printers now etch steamships and locomotives instead of lovers and lanterns. The floating world. The delicate balance of beauty art and forbidden affection that defined Edo is suddenly seen as backward, embarrassing, even primitive. But it's not just culture that's changing. It's morality itself. Western missionaries arrive in Yokohama preaching new doctrines of sin and virtue. Victorian values imported wholesale clash with centuries of Japanese nuance. And where Edo once saw love between men as devotion or artistry, the new Japan sees perversion. The same poems once celebrated in samurai circles are now condemned as shameful. The irony is cruel. What the Tokugawa could only whisper against the Meiji government outlaws outright. The Penal Code of 1872 borrows Western legal language and criminalizes male-male intimacy. Overnight, The stories, art, and rituals that had thrived for centuries become taboo. Civilization, they call it. But to many, it feels more like erasure. You imagine one of Edo's last artists, perhaps an aging Utamaro apprentice, staring at his empty studio, his brushes stiff with dust. The prints that once made him money are unsellable now the subject's forbidden. The world that once loved ambiguity now demands categories. Masculine, feminine, moral, immoral. The gray has been painted black and white, and yet ghosts linger in the side streets of Asakusa and Ueno. A few of the old onagata still perform quietly for private audiences. They no longer wear their full costumes. A fan, a gesture, a half-whispered line is all that remains of the illusion. Some young men, sons of merchants and artists, still exchange poems in secret. A few temples quietly preserve scrolls and letters no one dares publish. The floating world has gone underground. One Western journalist visiting Tokyo in the 1880s wrote with surprise that Japanese morals appear strangely flexible, though public speech forbids acknowledgement. He had no idea he was glimpsing the afterimage of something far older than his own culture's righteousness. The truth was simple. The heart of Edo never really left. It just learned silence. Imagine what it must have felt like for those who remembered. The samurai who once wrote love poems to their pages now told those memories were shameful. The monks who'd spoken of affection as enlightenment now ordered to repent. The actors who once commanded crowds now hiding in plain sight. To lose a language of love is to lose a piece of the soul. But the erasure wasn't complete. Ukiyo-e prints buried and forgotten began to resurface decades later, faded, torn, yet unmistakably alive. Western collectors ironically saved what Japan tried to forget. When those prints reached Paris in the late 19th century, they sparked fascination among European artists. Degas, Toulouse-Lautrec, and even Van Gogh studied their lines, their compositions, their sensuality. The West that once imposed its shame now worshipped Edo's beauty. There's a cruel poetry in that reversal. The same art once branded indecent became the foundation of modern art. And yet most viewers never realize the full story behind those graceful hands and suggestive glances. They admired the brushwork, not the coded history it carried. The floating world survived, but in translation, stripped of its soul. You walk through modernizing Tokyo and see both the loss and the continuity. Western suits replace kimonos, but people still exchange furtive glances on rainy streets. Neon signs replace lanterns, but love still hides behind closed doors. The soul of Edo, it seems, was too stubborn to vanish. It just changed its wardrobe. One aging actor interviewed in 1895 said it best. In my youth, we wore paint and wigs to become women. Now, we wear silence to become men. You stop for a moment, imagining him, his once famous face now lined with years, standing before a mirror, remembering the roles that once gave him freedom. Outside, the city's electric lights buzz to life. Inside, he whispers an old kabuki verse under his breath, as if to remind himself who he used to be. The Meiji-era prided itself on progress, but every light it turned on cast a shadow, and in that shadow lived the memory of Edo, a place where art, beauty, and love once blurred together so perfectly that the world forgot where one ended and the other began. And though history tried to bury that memory, it never stayed buried for long. You stand in the heart of Tokyo now, a city of steel, and glass neon and noise. But if you pause long enough, if you let the hum of the trains fade and the crowd wash past you, you can still feel something pulsing beneath it all. The same heartbeat that once echoed in Edo's candlelit tea houses. The same rhythm that guided a samurai's brush as he wrote his lover's name in secret ink. The ghosts of the floating world never left. They simply learned how to glow in fluorescent light. Shinjuku at midnight feels almost like Yoshiwara reborn. Endless signs, endless laughter, endless masks. People flow through the streets, each chasing their own moment of escape, their own slice of impermanence. You catch a glimpse of a rainbow flag fluttering from a tiny bar window. Two men step inside, shoulders brushing. Nobody stares. Nobody whispers. Somewhere between the whiskey and the laughter, you realize you've walked into Edo's afterlife, reborn, renamed, and freer than ever. Tokyo's modern LGBTQ+ scene didn't appear out of nowhere. It's the quiet continuation of everything Edo once dared to imagine. In places like Nichome, Japan's most famous gay district, you'll find hundreds of bars packed into narrow alleys, each glowing with soft lantern light. Some play old enka songs, others blast pop music. Each doorway feels like a paper screen between worlds, 1 foot in tradition, 1 in rebellion. You could say it's the floating world 2.0 with karaoke instead of shamisen. And the best part, the coded gestures, the careful secrecy they've transformed into something proud, joyful, unashamed. People who once would have whispered now laugh openly. Artists and filmmakers revisit Edo's history, reclaiming what was hidden. Museums display shunga prints with academic reverence, their captions no longer warning of obscenity, but celebrating them as cultural heritage. The past, once censored, now has a microphone. But Tokyo doesn't just remember Edo, it converses with it. Every pride parade here feels like a dialogue with the ghosts of the floating world. Where Onagata once blurred gender through performance, drag performers now do it through art and fashion. Where Wakashu once balanced grace and power, modern queer youth do the same, just with dyed hair and phone cameras instead of fans and poetry. The tools have changed, but the spirit is identical: beauty, as rebellion, self-expression, as survival. You wander down the back streets of Nichome and spot a mural painted on a brick wall, a kabuki mask half-painted in rainbow colors. Beneath it, someone has scrawled in English, "Nothing was ever truly hidden." It feels like Edo speaking through graffiti, cheeky, poetic, a little sad, but ultimately triumphant. And you can't help but think about all those who came before the monks who mistook love for enlightenment, the samurai who mistook loyalty for love, the artists who turned desire into woodblock prints, the actors who performed femininity until it became divine. None of them could have imagined this world, but somehow they built its foundation. Their stories, buried under centuries of dust and silence, now bloom again under Tokyo's neon. There's something deeply comforting about that continuity. History isn't linear. It loops like the shamisen melodies still echoing faintly in your imagination. Edo's contradictions, beauty and disciplined secrecy and expression, are still Japan's contradictions today. And perhaps that's what makes the country so endlessly fascinating. It never truly forgets, it just transforms. You walk until dawn breaks over Shinjuku. The city hums awake. Trains clatter, shopkeepers yawn, and sunlight glints off the high-rises. Somewhere below, down an unmarked staircase, the last of the night's laughter fades from a tiny bar where two strangers met and didn't have to hide. You remember what one Edo poet once wrote: "The river flows on, but moonlight always returns to the same bend. That's Tokyo now, a river that keeps moving, carrying with it fragments of a past that never drowned. Every lantern that flickers in Nichome, every pride flag that waves in the rain, every smile exchanged between two men on a crowded train. Each is a quiet act of remembrance, and maybe that's the most human thing of all. The floating world didn't die. It evolved. It traded ink for light poetry, for electricity secrecy, for song. You can still hear it if you listen to the laughter of Edo's lovers hidden in the static of Tokyo's streets. So when you finally close your eyes tonight, let that thought drift with you. Beauty was never destroyed, only remade. The ghosts of the floating world are still here walking beside you. Beneath the neon sky, whispering softly, love always finds a way back to the light. In the end, Edo's untold history of same-sex love wasn't rebellion. It was reflection, art ritual, and affection woven into everyday life, hidden beneath silk and shadow, yet endlessly human. And while those stories fade into Tokyo's neon, another secret world awaits behind painted fans and whispered laughter, the mesmerizing, dangerous world of Edo's courtesans. They called it Ukiyo, the floating world. But floating above, what exactly? Poverty, boredom, morality. You find yourself stepping through Edo's misty streets in the early 1700s, where reality feels just a little too choreographed to be real. The lanterns shimmer through the evening haze, like promises no one intends to keep. Drums thump from tea houses. The air smells faintly of grilled eel, sandalwood, and debt. Welcome to Yoshiwara, the pleasure district so dazzling it convinced half of Japan that fantasy was an art form. The gate looms first. The omen or great gate built like a theatrical archway into another reality. Once you pass beneath it, you're no longer in ordinary Edo. Inside these walls, the rules of class, gender, and virtue bend like smoke. Samurai can flirt with merchants, poets, debate prices, and artists sketch scandal under flickering candlelight. You can almost hear the whisper, "Forget the outside world. Time here runs differently." But make no mistake, Yoshiwara is not chaos. It's engineered. Every alley, every lattice window, every lantern-lit veranda is part of a social machine so intricate it could rival the shogun's bureaucracy. The Tokugawa rulers established Yoshiwara back in 1617, not to encourage pleasure, but to contain it. One carefully walled district where desire could be managed, taxed, and conveniently forgotten by morning. Think of it as the world's most organized illusion part, theme park, part social pressure valve. You wander deeper, your sandals crunching over pebbled lanes named after flowers, Sakura, Yanagi, Kiku. Each one leads to a brothel designed like a miniature palace. Laughter ripples from behind wooden screens. Painted signs list house names as proudly as samurai clans. And everywhere, you sense that this is not simply a red light quarter. It's a theater of elegance. Here, even temptation has etiquette. The courtesans are not waiting on corners. They're elevated behind latticed windows, called haremis, visible yet untouchable. You pause before one, a vision in layered kimono, her hair piled into an impossible tower of lacquer and pins. Her eyes do not meet yours directly. That would be too forward. Instead, she glances once the way a performer cues her scene partner. The message is clear. If you wish to play, learn your lines first. Below her rank, lower-tier courtesans gossip with attendants, their laughter as rehearsed as it is infectious. They know how to make men Feel chosen, even when every gesture is part of the same script. Yoshiwara isn't about buying love, it's about buying the illusion that you are worth performing for. Ever been to a modern fine dining restaurant where the waiter calls you sir, like you're royalty? Even though you're splitting the bill 3 ways, Edo did it first with silk and poetry instead of menus. You follow a procession, winding through the street, an oiran doshu, the parade of a top-ranked courtesan on her way to meet a patron. Her steps are slow, deliberate, only 6 inches at a time, because her shoes, the towering komageta, are more architecture than footwear. 2 attendants hold her sleeves. Another carries her fan. Crowds part reverently as she passes, murmuring her name, Takigawa of Tamaya House. She's less a woman than a living brand, trained, painted, and choreographed to embody everything Edo admires but forbids. Her clients are the wealthy merchants' men who can afford both the price and the patience. To meet her, one must first send extravagant gifts, silk bolts, rare incense, sometimes even poems, then wait weeks for approval. And if she accepts, the evening unfolds like ritual theater, tea, served verses exchanged emotions, negotiated through coded gestures. You realize that Yoshiwara isn't selling intimacy. It's selling a dream that feels too expensive to question. You pass a tea house and overhear 2 apprentices whispering about the real Edo, the city outside these walls. Mud fish markets, arguments over rice prices. Inside Yoshiwara, none of that exists. Here even the moon looks better behaved. The courtesans' voices drift through the night singing of fleeting love and cherry blossom, symbols of beauty meant to be admired precisely because they won't last. If you look closely, you'll see how everything in Yoshiwara mimics transience. The lanterns burn just long enough to make faces glow, then fade. The makeup white as porcelain cracks by dawn. The laughter dissolves with the first crow of the rooster. But that's the point. Edo's floating world thrives on ephemerality. The guests come not to escape death, but to rehearse it gently in pleasure's costume. As you leave the main avenue, you glance back at the gate glowing behind you. For a moment, it almost feels like waking from a dream. And yet the whisper follows you out, silky amused, half invitation, half warning. The floating world never really ends. It just waits for you to come back. The next evening, you find yourself back at Yoshiwara's gate because no one really visits the floating world just once. It's like gravity made of perfume. The guards nod as you enter, recognizing another pilgrim, drawn by curiosity, loneliness, or maybe just boredom disguised as sophistication. Tonight, you want to understand how one even earns the privilege of meeting a courtesan. Spoiler: it's not as simple as showing up with cash. The first lesson you learn, desire in Yoshiwara, is regulated. Every encounter begins with ceremony. Before you even see the woman you're here for, there are formal visits, gift exchanges, and a strict ladder of introductions. Think of it as a romantic bureaucracy with better lighting. Patrons must first meet the Kai, the go-between hostess who manages bookings, and then prove they're not just another broke poet chasing poetry in human form. Inside the tea house, you sit cross-legged while the Nakai pours sake and studies you the way an accountant studies a balance sheet. Your clothes, your manners, your ability to pour a drink without spilling all of it becomes a background check. Edo may have a class system, but in Yoshiwara, the ultimate currency is composure. A samurai who slouches loses face faster than a merchant who quotes a decent haiku. If you pass inspection, you're escorted to an evening gathering known as a misadashi, a kind of debut viewing. The room glows with candlelight and quiet flattery. Courtesans appear behind bamboo screens, each introduced by name and rank, from the high-born Oiran down to the Tsuboni, the lower-class entertainers. The higher her rank, the fewer words she speaks. Silence here is luxury. It means people wait for you to fill the quiet with awe. The Oiran naturally is the centerpiece. Her hair gleams with tortoiseshell combs, worth more than your rent her sleeves long enough to sweep away anyone's confidence. She performs her entrance like a religious rite, measured steps, soft gaze, each movement rehearsed to make you believe it's spontaneous. You begin to realize that everything in Yoshiwara operates on paradox art, designed to look like accident hierarchy disguised as romance. But even if you fall in love instantly, patience is mandatory. To meet an Oiran privately, you must make several yobidashi, formal summons, across multiple nights. Each visit requires gifts silk for her attendance, incense for her room, a little poem, or fan for her amusement. Only after the third or fourth invitation might she accept. Think of it as subscription-based affection, centuries before the internet invented the same idea. As you sip, Seki, an older patron, leans over and chuckles. Most men fall in love with the waiting, he says. You believe him. The entire process is designed to make anticipation feel sacred. The chase, not the catch, is what Yoshiwara sells best. Meanwhile, the courtesans study their guests as keenly as any scholar. They can tell a merchant from the way he folds his sleeve, a samurai from the way he apologizes for existing. Each client gets a customized illusion. A lonely poet, she'll quote Basho until he cries. A soldier, she'll praise his bravery until he blushes. They're less companions than mirrors reflecting whatever version of yourself you wish the world would see. Down the hall, laughter bursts from another room. You peek through the sliding door to glimpse a table of rowdy merchants competing to outdo each other's extravagance. One orders a goldfish bowl as a centerpiece. Another sends for fireworks. You think this is what money sounds like when it tries to prove it's having fun. Even here, desire doubles as performance. Not every visitor is rich, though. Some men save for months just for a single night. You meet one, a humble craftsman, who spent a year's wages for an audience with a courtesan he's only glimpsed in paintings. He doesn't want pleasure, he says. He wants proof that beauty can be bought, if only once. It's oddly poetic and heartbreakingly human. Through all this, the Nikai orchestrates the flow like a conductor. She tracks which patrons are promising which courtesans are available, and how much emotional illusion each evening can safely sustain. If she were alive today, she'd be running a 5-star hotel or possibly a major tech company. You begin to understand why Yoshiwara lasted for over 2 centuries. It turned chaos into art, desire into procedure. When your turn finally comes to leave, the Oiran glances your way, not warmly, not coldly, just knowingly. Her gaze says, "You'll be back." And she's right. The floating world thrives on repetition. Every night begins with the same ritual, but somehow feels unique. You step back through the gate, the night air cool against your face. Somewhere behind you, a shamisen plucks the same tune it played yesterday. You realize you're humming along already. By now, you've learned how the floating world lures its guests. But have you wondered how its stars are born? Courtesans don't appear from thin air like incense smoke. They are made sculpted through ritual training and endurance, so intense it would make modern celebrity boot camps look like summer camp. You step behind the screens, and into the narrow wooden dormitories where the illusion begins. The first thing that strikes you is how young the apprentices are. Some barely into their teens, sold by struggling families to brothels for a chance, however small, at a more comfortable life. The contracts are precise, a decade of service to repay their purchase price. The girls are not yet courtesans. They're Shinzo or Kamuro, assistants errand runners, eyes wide and futures uncertain. Each one is technically property, but treated as potential, a human investment wrapped in kimono cloth. Training starts early dawn to midnight. Etiquette lessons so strict that even how you blink has a protocol. You watch a senior attendant teach a girl to bow not too fast, not too deep, never revealing the neck. It must suggest both respect and restraint. Then there's speech. Every syllable must glide like silk. The dialect of Yoshiwara is its own art form, half poetry, half negotiation. Say too little, you lose the client's interest. Say too much, you lose his respect. Even posture is politics. You watch them practice how to pour tea, lift chopsticks, walk across tatami without creasing silk. Grace says the instructor is the armor we wear. And it's true. In a world where beauty is commerce, the smallest slip could mean demotion or worse, irrelevance. But the floating world doesn't just teach manners, it cultivates intellect. These women study poetry, classical literature, and the Genji Monogatari until they can quote lines to match any mood. They learn the shamisen flute and koto. They paint. They dance. Imagine a finishing school combined with a performing arts academy, except failure. Here isn't disappointing your parents, it's losing your livelihood. You sit quietly as a lesson in shamisen begins. The room smells of sandalwood and determination. The teacher, an older courtesan with eyes like polished obsidian, plays a phrase and stops. Again, she says. The girl's fingers tremble, but she repeats it until the sound stops squeaking. Perfection isn't optional. It's the ticket out of servitude. By evening, the apprentices follow their mistresses through the brothel corridors, watching, learning, memorizing everything. The way an oiran handles a conversation, equal parts flirtation and philosophy. The timing of laughter, the placement of a hand on the lacquered table. Nothing here is accidental. Desire is choreography, and they are learning its steps. Every house has its hierarchy. At the bottom, Kamuro, too young to serve guests. Above them, Shinzo assistants, who attend the courtesans, light incense, and prepare hairpins. Then come the tsubone and koshi mid-rank entertainers. And finally, the oiran, the crown jewel of the house. Only one in hundreds reaches that rank, and the path there is lined with debt competition and heartbreak. You meet a girl named Aoi, maybe 15, who dreams of becoming an oiran. Her mother once worked the same district. She herself knows no other world. They say the oiran never walks alone, she whispers. But I wonder if she ever walks free. Her words hang in the smoky air, as fragile as the paper walls that surround her. Discipline is enforced with quiet precision. Not cruelty exactly, but pressure, constant, unrelenting. A missed appointment, a clumsy greeting, a ruined kimono, and the fines pile up. Debts stretch into years. The courtesans learn to smile, even when exhaustion seeps through their bones. You watch one, older now, painting her lips crimson before meeting a client. Her hands tremble slightly. A smile, she says softly, costs less than defiance. The irony is bitter but beautiful. Within this system, built on control, the courtesans become masters of agency in disguise. They learn to read people faster than any merchant or magistrate. They know which compliments open wallets, which silences command respect. Behind every act of submission lies a calculation. Some even rise to legendary fame like Takao, the famed Oiran, who defied her patron and became a folk hero. Or Yoshino, who refused to smile for anyone beneath her station, turning arrogance into allure. The apprentices whisper these names like prayers. Takao did not bow. Yoshino laughed at a samurai. They tell these stories as if rebellion itself were perfume rare, intoxicating dangerous. Sometimes you think about modern fame. How actors and influencers polish their image for followers curate their lives like art galleries. The courtesans did the same centuries earlier, except their audience sat inches away, and every compliment came with a price tag. They understood brand management before the concept had a name. As night deepens, the apprentices gather in their quarters, combing each other's hair, gossiping about clients they've never met, dreams they might never reach. Outside, the lanterns flicker against the dark soft as lullabies. For a brief moment, the room fills with laughter, unrehearsed, unprofitable real. And you think, maybe that's the truest thing in the floating world. Even in a place built on illusion, humanity keeps finding a way to slip through the cracks like light sneaking through paper doors. They say a courtesan's power isn't in her beauty, it's in her silk. And you finally understand why the moment you see an Oiran preparing for her procession. The room glows with candlelight, reflected on layer after layer of fabric, each fold, whispering secrets older than the city itself. Her attendants swarm like bees around a living flower. You don't even breathe for fear of disturbing the ritual. If every fabric could lie, the Oiran's kimono would be the most convincing storyteller in Japan. She wears 12 layers, each dyed and embroidered in symbols that only the initiated can read. A crane for longevity, a wave for resilience, a wisteria vine for quiet strength. You realize that fashion here isn't just decoration, it's language. To a trained eye, a courtesan's outfit tells her entire social status, her house, her current patron, even her mood. It's less, what are you wearing, and more, who are you today? Her hair is another battlefield of meaning. The style is called Hyogo Mage, a towering structure built from wax combs and courage. Dozens of kanzashi hairpins glitter through it, gold amber coral tortoiseshell. Each one serves as a kind of coded punctuation mark. A single misplaced ornament could insult a client or elevate a rival. You watch her reflection in the mirror. She doesn't look at herself with vanity, but with strategy. Appearance, she murmurs, is armor you smile through. Attendants tighten her obi sash so high, it seems she can barely breathe. But that's part of the design. Beauty here is not about comfort, it's about discipline. The Oiran's elegance must appear effortless, even when every inch of her aches. When she finally stands, the sound of silk against tatami is like wind through distant trees. You realize even the rustle of fabric here has choreography. You step outside with the procession. The street is lined with spectators waiting for her Oiran doshu. Lanterns swing like low-hanging stars as she takes her first step. The geta sandals beneath her are nearly a foot tall, forcing her to move with the slow, hypnotic rhythm that defines her rank. The crowd parts like water around a ship. Her clients bow. Children gape. Artists sketch furiously to capture the moment before it fades. Every part of her outfit serves a double purpose. Those extravagant sleeves, perfect for concealing letters or gifts. The elaborate knot of her sash, a subtle signal of exclusivity. Only top courtesans tie it in front, both a practical decision for service and a declaration of dominance. Nothing in Yoshiwara happens by accident. You overhear two merchants whisper. One says I'd trade a year's income for a single glance. The other laughs. You already just did. They're right, just being seen at an Oiran's parade costs as much as a month's rent. It's social currency, the Edo version of being photographed at a celebrity gala. You can't help but grin. In some ways, humanity hasn't changed much. Inside the tea house later, the Oiran unravels her kimono for her attendants to refold. It takes nearly an hour. Beneath the glamour, her shoulders bear the faint bruises of constant weight. She gestures toward you with a wry smile. Do you know what happens when a man loves the silk more than the woman inside it? She asks. You shake your head. He falls in love with a shadow, and shadows can't love back. Her words linger as the attendants carry away each folded layer. What's left beneath all that silk is startlingly human, a woman exhausted but sharp-eyed, balancing the delicate arithmetic of beauty and survival. In this world, luxury is both armor and chain. She explains that courtesans compete not just for patrons, but for attention within their own houses. A single misplaced compliment or rival rumor can shift fortunes overnight. Fashion becomes warfare by embroidery. One courtesan might order a kimono patterned after Mount Fuji just to eclipse a rival's ocean wave motif. The cloth merchants naturally adore it. You suspect half of Edo's economy runs on silk and envy. A few artists linger nearby, sketching discreetly. They are ukiyo-e masters in search of inspiration. One, a quiet man named Hishikawa Morinobu, once painted courtesans with such delicacy that people swore the figures could breathe. Others, Utamaro Harunobu, turn these women into cultural icons. Their prints sell in markets across Japan, and ironically, some courtesans achieve immortality not through clients, but through art. Imagine being so famous that your face outlives your name. You begin to notice that the Oiran's fashion isn't just self-expression, it's propaganda. Each appearance in public reinforces the myth of Yoshiwara as the capital of elegance. Even the shogunate benefits. As long as the masses are dazzled by beauty, they forget to question power. You can almost hear the silk whispering, keep looking, keep dreaming. Late that night, as she removes her final hairpin, you see her scalp indentations where the ornaments pressed all day. She catches your glance and laughs softly. The floating world loves its flowers, she says, but never its roots. And suddenly, the layers of silk don't look like luxury anymore. They look like camouflage. You begin to understand that Yoshiwara isn't truly about passion. It's about performance. Every flirtatious glance, every carefully poured cup of sake is part of a transaction so elegant you almost forget it's business. The courtesans of Edo don't fall in love. They negotiate it. The first time you watch an Oiran entertain a guest, you're struck by how choreographed it feels. The patron, usually a wealthy merchant or a low-ranking samurai, sits slightly elevated the courtesan just below. They exchange compliments, like chess moves. Your eyes, he says, are brighter than the lanterns of Asakusa. She smiles, replying, and just as fleeting, I'm afraid. It's witty, charming, and completely rehearsed. Here, affection is a contract. Clients send gifts long before they're ever invited to share a drink. The most desirable Oiran might require several visits before granting a private audience. And even then, every word exchanged is recorded in the ledger. What was ordered? How much was spent? Who accompanied whom? Emotion has a price printed neatly in ink. You hear the older patrons talk about winning an Oiran's favor, but it's never truly won. It's rented like a silk kimono on festival day. The courtesan is expected to act smitten, yet measured warm enough to flatter distant enough to maintain her value. Too much sincerity is bad business. You realize that in this world, love is not a confession, it's an economy. Take, for example, the legendary Oiran Taiyu Takigawa. Her client, a powerful merchant named Genshiro, once spent enough silver on her to fund an entire rice shipment to Osaka. For weeks, the city gossiped that he had captured her heart. But when Genshiro went bankrupt, Takigawa's affection cooled with professional efficiency. A cherry blossom that blooms too long, she reportedly said, must be artificial. Brutal maybe, but fair. Survival depends on boundaries. There's a word in Edo slang iki, meaning refined simplicity or effortless charm. Courtesans live by it. They must appear both approachable and unattainable, both witty and subdued. Too much emotion, and they lose dignity. Too little, and they lose clients. You can't help but admire the precision. Modern dating apps could never replicate this level of emotional calculus. As the sake flows, the illusion deepens. The courtesan laughs, fans herself, leans in just enough to make the client believe he's exceptional. Yet you can see it in her eyes. She's measuring him, the tilt of his cup, the tremor of his hand, the kind of loneliness that can be monetized. She'll remember it all later, the way a shogi master remembers every move on the board. Still, some men can't tell the difference between affection and artistry. They fall hard, truly, pathetically hard. You hear stories of samurai pawning their swords to afford another visit of merchants, bankrupting themselves to buy their way into a courtesan's heart. One even stages a mock wedding, believing he's rescued his beloved from her life, only to discover she was simply fulfilling her contract. Tragic, yes. Predictable, absolutely. The women talk about these men with a mix of pity and professionalism. A fool's tears, one Oiran says, still spend like silver. But you can tell the cynicism is armor. Beneath it, there's weariness. To play affection so convincingly for so long requires a strange kind of emotional endurance, half acting, half amnesia. Sometimes the lines blur. A courtesan might grow genuinely fond of a patron, even if she can never admit it aloud. There are tales of secret letters, of forbidden attachments that defy the business model. One such story tells of Katsuyama, an Oiran, who refused to entertain any man but her chosen lover, a tea merchant. For that rebellion, she was dismissed from her house free, yes, but penniless. People still whisper her name with a mix of admiration and warning. You start to see how deeply ritualized love is in this world. The act of a wace or the courtesan's meeting with a client follows a structure like a no play. Introduction, climax, and graceful withdrawal. Even the teacups have meaning. Smaller ones imply intimacy, larger ones, formality. If only heartbreak were so easy to quantify. Yet beneath all this artifice, there's an honesty of a different kind. Both sides know the rules. The client pretends to be adored. The courtesan pretends to adore. Everyone gets what they pay for companionship, conversation, and most importantly, illusion. It's strangely civilized. There's less hypocrisy here than in most modern relationships, where everyone claims it's not about money. You overhear one patron musing aloud, "I think she truly loves me." The attendant beside you smirks. Then you're her best customer. You can't help laughing quietly. It's cruel but true. Later that night, you walk home through the misty lanes outside the district. You pass a small shrine where men leave coins praying for romantic luck. The irony doesn't escape you. In a city where love is bought by appointment, people still wish to stumble upon the real thing by accident. Somewhere behind the walls, an Oiran is laughing softly at a joke she's heard 1,000 times before. The sound drifts through the air, like incense pleasant practiced and gone, before you can tell whether it was real. By now, you've seen how courtesans rule their world through wit and ritual. But the clients, they're the audience, the financiers, and occasionally the fools. Tonight you follow one of them through Yoshiwara's lantern-lit alleys, and what unfolds feels less like romance and more like theater, funded by vanity. The man's name is Kichibei, a rice merchant whose waistline and wallet both suggest prosperity. His silk robe gleams, his hair is oiled to perfection, and his confidence is so loud it practically has an echo. He enters the tea house as though auditioning for a role he's already convinced he deserves. "I will see Oiran Agabono," he declares. The host bows as if to say, "Of course, sir, but first the paperwork of your delusion." Kichibei is what the courtesans call an itome, a man obsessed with being seen in Yoshiwara. He doesn't come for love, or even companionship. He comes for recognition. When he sits beside an Oiran, he's not admiring her eyes. He's watching the reflection of himself in them. You watch him pour sake, with exaggerated elegance, bragging about the cost of his new silk from Kyoto. Akebono listens politely, eyes half-lidded, smiling with professional warmth. She laughs exactly twice in the same rhythm, once to flatter, once to reset the pace. You realize she's controlling the conversation, like a musician guiding a drunk man's song. It's strange in Yoshiwara. The courtesans have less social freedom than any samurai, yet in this candlelit room, Akebono holds absolute power. She dictates tone, pace, and illusion. She knows Kichibei will leave, believing he's charmed her. Tomorrow she'll do the same with another merchant, another illusion. And so, the floating world floats on, powered by fragile egos and practiced empathy. But not all patrons are harmless. Some come seeking escape from responsibility. Samurai forbidden to express emotion find here a sanctioned place to feel, so long as they pay. Others come to test loyalty or to punish themselves with excess. You once overheard a man say, "I come to Yoshiwara not to forget life, but to see what it costs." If you, though, fall too deep. Like Sanosuke, a minor retainer who spent his inheritance on a courtesan named Uta. Their affair became infamous, a perfect example of Yoshiwara's cruel symmetry. He believed she loved him. She believed he could save her. When his silver ran out, her house forbade her to see him. He tried anyway, breaking into the district one rainy night, drunk and desperate. By dawn, he was gone, his sword found beside the canal. The storytellers turned it into a moral tale about folly. But you suspect it was really about how easily people confuse transaction with destiny. The courtesans know this pattern by heart. They play their parts gently with kindness, even, but they never forget the terms. One Oiran once said, "A man's affection is like sake, sweet at first, but it always runs out." You imagine she said that to hundreds of guests, and yet somehow it still feels wise. Still, not every night is tragedy or trickery. Some relationships evolve into curious partnerships. Wealthy patrons sponsor courtesans, long-term freeing them from debt in exchange for exclusivity. These arrangements, called nagakomi, can be both liberating and suffocating. For some women, it's a ticket to comfort. For others, another gilded cage. You meet one such woman, Sayaka, who now lives in a private villa outside the district. "He gave me freedom," she says, and then asked me never to use it. Meanwhile, the merchant Kichibei returns again and again. each visit more extravagant, more ridiculous. Once he brings an imported parrot just to make her laugh. Another time, he sends a poem written by a hired scribe because his own handwriting looks like spilled noodles. He spends so much that Akabono's house begins referring to him as our second patron saint. And yet when he finally stops coming, replaced by a younger trader with deeper pockets, she doesn't blink. That's the paradox of Yoshiwara attachment, is the most expensive thing you can't afford. Sometimes, you catch glimpses of sincerity between the lines. A small glance, a shared joke, a sigh that sounds too natural to be staged. Maybe illusion isn't always deception. Maybe it's survival wrapped in grace. After all, both the courtesan and her patron are performing what they wish life could be: effortless, beautiful, brief. As you walk past the tea houses, you overhear an old saying. In Yoshiwara, men pay to forget they're mortal. Women act to forget they're owned. The words hit like sake warm, going down bitter afterward. Outside the district, Edo sleeps under moonlight, unromantic and real. Inside, the candles burn on each flame, another act of pretend intimacy. You realize that the true genius of the courtesans isn't in how they seduce men. It's in how they let men seduce themselves. When you finally step back through the great gate, the laughter and shamisen music fade into a hum behind you. And yet you can't shake the feeling that Yoshiwara isn't something you leave. It's something that lingers like perfume on silk long after the night has ended. You might think the courtesans of Edo never slept, but freedom, not beauty, was the most forbidden luxury they dreamed of. You return to Yoshiwara just before dawn, the hour when the night exhales. The music is fading. The sake pitchers empty the candles, now pools of wax. The revelers have stumbled home or passed out in alleys, but the courtesans are still awake. This is their secret hour, the one the clients never see. Behind the grand facades and painted screens, Yoshiwara softens. The courtesans, finally released from performance, unpin their hair, peel away layers of silk, and trade elegance for exhaustion. You slip quietly through the corridors, guided by the sound of laughter that feels startlingly human. Inside, one shared chamber, half a dozen women sit cross-legged, hair-loose faces, wiped clean of white powder and crimson lips. For the first time, they look like sisters rather than rivals. One massages another's shoulders. A younger Kamuro dozes off mid-conversation. The hierarchy that rules their waking hours dissolves under the weight of fatigue. Don't tell the clients we laugh like this one jokes. They'd pay extra for it. You watch as an older oiran, named Tomimaru, tells a story, a parody of a pompous merchant who tried to quote poetry, but confused the tale of Genji with a sumo chant. The room bursts into laughter so contagious that even you join in quietly from the doorway. For a moment, the whole floating world feels grounded. They talk of small rebellions. One hides sweets from her matron's inventory. Another swaps the perfumed oil for plain sesame to save her scalp. Someone admits she sneaks out once a month, disguised in a plain yukata, to walk along the Sumida River. I like to watch fishermen, she says. They cast their lines and wait. No pretending, no price. The others sigh, as if she's describing a fairy tale. Freedom here is measured in seconds. A nap without makeup, a meal eaten without posture, a joke unfit for a client's ears. One courtesan hums softly, while stitching a torn sleeve, the tune an old folk song from the countryside. The words are about plum blossoms, blooming before the snow, melts a metaphor so obvious it almost hurts. Some find escape in art. One paints tiny watercolors of the view outside her window, nothing more than rooftops and smoke. But but she paints it every morning anyway. If I can't leave, she says, at least the light can. Another writes haiku on scraps of discarded letters. You read one left, near a teapot moon, behind paper walls. Even silence costs a coin, but I steal some now. They whisper about famous sisters who escaped. The tale of Yujo Komurasaki, who supposedly faked her death, slipped past the guards in a funerary cart, and vanished into the countryside with her lover. No one knows if she lived happily ever after, or simply changed cages. Still, her name has become a code for courage. When a courtesan refuses an unreasonable client, others say she pulled a Komurasaki. There's another story darker. A young woman once tried to run caught before she reached the outer moat. The punishment wasn't cruel by law, but the brothel's debts doubled in her absence. Her friends now work twice as hard to pay it back. In Yoshiwara, rebellion is contagious and costly. You can feel the tension between solidarity and self-preservation, a delicate dance every woman here performs without choreography. The camaraderie, though, is real. They share hairpins, share laughter, share secrets they can't tell anyone outside these walls. Men think we compete, one says, while sipping watered-down tea, but only we understand each other's exhaustion. There's pride in her voice, not bitterness, just the quiet dignity of endurance. As dawn approaches, a faint bell rings through the compound, the curfew lifting. The courtesans stretch, reapplying powder-tightening sashes. Another day begins, and the mask must return. You watch as the transformation unfolds, in reverse fatigue, melts into poise, laughter into measured silence. It's like watching butterflies climb back into cocoons. You ask Tomimaru how she keeps doing it, living between freedom and facade. She smiles. The world outside these walls is not free, either, she says. At least here we know the price of our illusions. Her words echo in your mind as the sun spills pale gold over the rooftops. You realize Yoshiwara's courtesans didn't just sell beauty. They mastered resilience, community, and irony in equal measure. Beneath their lacquered grace beats a defiance so quiet you might mistake it for grace itself. The city outside wakes carts, rumble, merchants shout. But inside Yoshiwara, the women of the night retreat to sleep, their laughter still humming in the air. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it whisper through the morning mist, an anthem of endurance disguised as a sigh. By now, the floating world has seeped into everything art-fashion conversation, even the way people dream. You can't walk through Edo without seeing its fingerprints, the flicker of painted fans, the faint melody of shamisen in the distance, the sly wink of a courtesan immortalized in ink. The artists have arrived, and they've made Yoshiwara their muse. Everywhere, you see the signs of ukiyo-e, pictures of the floating world. Shops on Nihonbashi Street sell them stacked in piles, bright colors glowing beneath glass. There's Utamaro's portraits, where the courtesans' faces stretch like willows, delicate, aloof, perfectly bored. Hokusai paints them laughing beneath cherry blossoms, their smiles like riddles. Harunobu sketches them in morning light, still half dreaming after a night of theater and sake. Even Hiroshige, who preferred landscapes, can't resist a few silhouettes of Yoshiwara lanterns glowing in rain. Art here doesn't just imitate life, it edits it. You realize how cleverly these prints conceal the grit beneath the glamour. In ukiyo-e, there's no exhaustion, no debts, no rules, just beauty suspended in eternal twilight. It's the floating world, distilled, captured in woodblock lines so graceful that reality starts to look like an inconvenience. You watch a printmaker at work one afternoon. He's carving a block of cherry wood tongue between his teeth, the grooves as precise as scripture. When he presses paper onto the inked surface, a courtesan emerges, her face serene, her eyes distant. Her name, you ask. The artist shrugs. Does it matter? Maybe not to him, but you wonder if the real woman, whoever she was, ever knew her likeness would outlast her body. In many ways, these prints become the social media of Edo. People collect them, trade them, debate. Which courtesan or actor looks more elegant? They serve as advertisements, gossip, and aspiration all at once. I saw her in an Utamaro print, a man boasts, as if that alone grants him intimacy. The irony is delicious. Everyone in Edo claims to know the courtesans, yet only through paper and rumor. The courtesans themselves understand this game. They pose for portraits, knowing fame keeps their names in circulation, and circulation keeps business alive. The right ukiyo-e can make a woman legendary overnight. Oiran Hanaogi of the Ogiya House once became so famous after a single print that her client list filled for months. The artist made me immortal, she said, but my feet still hurt. Kabuki theater adds another layer to this dance of illusion. Actors called onagata specialize in playing women, sometimes even portraying courtesans who themselves are performing femininity. You watch a performance one night and feel your sense of reality unravel. A man plays a woman pretending to love another man, pretending to be noble. The audience laughs, cries, and cheers. By curtain call, no one remembers who acting anymore. You think maybe that's the point. The Edo government pretends to disapprove, of course. Officials issue bans on frivolous art, indecent depictions, and moral corruption. But censorship in Edo is like rain on bamboo. It slides right off. Artists simply rename their subjects, changing Takigawa of Yoshiwara to Lady Plum Blossom or Dream of the Willow. Everyone knows, and no one cares. Even the shogun's advisors collect prints in secret. One historian later joked, censorship in Edo was just another genre. The floating world's art also transforms ordinary life. You see women in the city dressing like courtesans, mimicking their hairstyles and patterned sleeves. Merchants copy their perfume blends. Even tea houses far from Yoshiwara advertise Oiran-style service. The courtesans have become cultural icons, models of elegance for a society that officially pretends to condemn them. It's as if the empire of morality needs its own heretics to stay interesting. One afternoon, you overhear two students debating in a print shop. Are the courtesans artists or victims, asks one. The other laughs. Why not both? That answer sits with you. Maybe that's what made the floating world so intoxicating. It blurred every boundary, art and commerce, virtue and vice, truth and dream. And yet art always hints at the cost. Some prints hide small details. Only the observant notice a faint shadow of a tear, a creased kimono, a clock showing the late hour. Little reminders that beauty is built on exhaustion. Once you find a print where the courtesan's eyes seem to follow you differently depending on the light, warm in the morning, distant by night, you wonder if the artist planned it or if the paper simply remembered her too well. Outside, Edo's streets buzz with imitation. Young poets quote lines inspired by courtesans they've never met. Tailors copy the latest Yoshiwara trends. Even moralists can't resist describing the district in sinful detail. You start to see the irony. Everyone condemns Yoshiwara, yet everyone borrows from it. The floating world may be fenced in by walls, but its reflections spill across the entire city like ink through rice paper. As evening falls, you pass by a theater where a new play draws crowds, a tragic romance based on the doomed lovers of the pleasure quarter. The audience sobs at the end, wiping tears with silk sleeves, then walks out into the same night that inspired it. They mourn illusion and then go live inside it again. You smile to yourself. The floating world, you realize, doesn't just sell dreams. It teaches people how to dream beautifully, even when they know they'll wake up. By the late 1800s, the floating world begins to flicker. Its lanterns still burn, but their glow competes with something colder. Gaslight factories and Western clocks ticking louder than the shamisen. You walk through Yoshiwara's main avenue and notice the air has changed. The laughter sounds forced now. The perfume hangs heavier, trying to mask a decay no scent can hide. Every illusion ends when reality invents better lighting. Japan is modernizing. Edo has become Tokyo Railway's hum, where processions once paraded, and the Meiji government frowns on anything that smells like the old order. Yoshiwara, once protected by the Tokugawa shoguns as a necessary safety valve, is now an embarrassment. Morality reforms sweep through the new capital, preaching Christian virtue and Western respectability. Progress, they call it. But to Yoshiwara's courtesans, it feels more like extinction dressed as decency. The brothels try to adapt. They rename themselves entertainment houses. Courtesans trade their towering Komageta sandals for modest slippers, their 12-layer kimonos for imported fabrics. Some even learn a few English phrases for curious foreign visitors. You overhear one woman practicing in front of a mirror, "Hello, nice gentleman." Her accent is careful, her eyes tired. Outside the gates, Tokyo changes faster than anyone can keep up. The Meiji Restoration tears down the samurai class, rewrites the laws, and replaces woodblock prints with photographs. Suddenly, everyone wants something real, or at least something that looks like it. The courtesans, once the pinnacle of artifice, can't compete with modernity's new illusions. You see an oiran posing stiffly for a photographer, her elaborate hair clashing with a gray industrial backdrop. The resulting image looks like a ghost haunting progress. Fewer patrons come now. The wealthy merchants who once lavished silver on poetry and sake now invest in telegraph lines and textile mills. The young men of Tokyo, dressed in Western suits, sneer at the floating world as old-fashioned. The oiran are relics, one says. They sell memories. He's not wrong. You wander into a tea house that used to host poetry nights. The shamisen still rests in the corner, but its strings gather dust. A lone woman, her face lined and serene, sips tea by herself. You recognize her, faintly, Tomimaru, the same courtesan who once laughed at dawn with her sisters. She catches your glance and smiles. "Even dreams retire," she says. "But we kept people company while they lasted." The reforms grow harsher. In 1872, the government issues the Emancipation Proclamation of prostitutes, freeing women from contractual servitude, but not from poverty. Many courtesans leave Yoshiwara only to find that freedom without income is another kind of captivity. Some marry. Others become geisha, adapting their skills to the new entertainment districts. A few vanish entirely, swallowed by Tokyo's expanding sprawl. Yoshiwara itself doesn't die overnight. It fades like incense, lingering long after the fire's gone out. Fires literally hasten its decline. The district burned several times in the late 19th century, each reconstruction smaller, dimmer, less enchanted. By the early 20th century, it's a shadow of its former self. Electric lights, replacing lanterns, gramophones, replacing shamisen, the courtesan's laughter replaced by the hum of trams outside the walls. Artists mourn its passing. Painters like Kobayashi Kiyochika capture Yoshiwara in twilight, the old tea houses reflected in puddles, the courtesan's parasols glowing faintly against smog. Writers describe it with nostalgia, like a dream that ended before they were ready to wake. One poet calls it the Museum of Forgotten Hearts. Even as it fades, Yoshiwara shapes Japan's new identity. The idea of the bijin, the beautiful woman as symbol of cultural refinement, outlives the brothel walls. Advertisements for cosmetics and kimonos borrow the courtesan's look, stripping it of context but keeping the allure. The floating world becomes a metaphor, not a place, a reminder that beauty, no matter how disciplined, always floats away. You visit one last time near the turn of the century. The great gate still stands, though its paint is chipped and its guard half asleep. Inside, a handful of aging courtesans linger like veterans of a forgotten war. They still dress with care, still bow with elegance, but the world no longer bows back. One hums an old tune as she pours you tea. Cherry blossoms fall, even the river forgets. But I remember. You ask her what she remembers most. She thinks for a moment, eyes distant. The noise, she says finally. The laughter, the footsteps, the perfume in the wind. The feeling that we were the center of the world, even if we weren't allowed to leave it. As you walk away, the streets beyond Yoshiwara buzz with trams, newsboys, and the clatter of progress. You glance back once more at the fading lanterns and realize the floating world didn't vanish. It just drifted somewhere else, maybe into the way people still chase beauty they can't keep. Centuries later, the floating world still lingers in perfume bottles, pop culture, and the way beauty pretends to be freedom. You return to modern Tokyo, where the old Yoshiwara has all but vanished. The streets that once pulsed with lanterns and laughter now hum with vending machines and neon. The famous gate is gone, rebuilt in memory alone. Yet as you walk, you can still feel it, the faint perfume of history clinging to the air like incense after prayer. It's strange, isn't it? The district may be gone, but its spirit never really left. You see echoes of it in department stores selling luxury kimonos, in TV dramas, romanticizing Edo's mysterious courtesans, in the meticulous beauty rituals still admired in Japan today. Even the word ukiyo, once meaning the floating world of fleeting pleasure, has been reborn as ukiyo, an aesthetic of elegance in impermanence. The courtesans might smile at the irony their world built to disappear refused to die. You stop at a small museum exhibit showcasing Edo-Era artifacts, combs fans, and hairpins rescued from the ruins of Yoshiwara. Behind glass sits an oiran's hair ornament, its coral and gold dulled by centuries. You imagine the woman who once wore it, the weight on her neck, the steady poise in her movements. She's nameless now, but her art still survives in every detail. The fold of a sleeve, the tilt of a head, the balance between restraint and seduction. Scholars today describe Yoshiwara as a paradox, a place of oppression that produced icons of power, a gilded cage that birthed the first Japanese celebrities. Feminist historians debate whether the courtesans were victims or visionaries. You think of them as both trapped by circumstance, yet brilliant enough to transform confinement into performance and pain into poetry. In a quiet corner of the exhibit, you notice an old ukiyo-e print by Utamaro. The colors have faded, but the courtesan's expression remains timeless, serene, detached, aware that the world is watching her, but unwilling to reveal what she's thinking. Her eyes seem to look past you, perhaps, toward a future she could never imagine, where her face would appear on postcards and t-shirts. If she knew she'd outlive her clients by centuries, would she have smiled differently? Outside, the city glows. LED lights instead of lanterns, trains instead of palanquins, but the choreography feels familiar. The same polished manners, the same obsession with presentation. Businessmen in crisp suits hurry past women in immaculate makeup, both playing their roles with Edo-level discipline. You realize the floating world didn't sink. It modernized. The stage just got bigger. In entertainment districts like Ginza and Shinjuku, you see new versions of the Oiran's poised hostesses and idols mastering the art of conversation, flattery, and emotional illusion. The vocabulary has changed, but the performance hasn't. Even social media, with its filters and carefully arranged authenticity, carries something of Yoshiwara's spirit. Everyone curating, everyone performing beauty they hope might be believed. But what's truly haunting is how the courtesan's legacy reshaped Japan's idea of femininity itself. The patience, the grace, the emotional intelligence, the quiet defiance, all born from Yoshiwara's walls, became national ideals. Women were expected to emulate traits that were once survival tactics. Its history's slyest twist, the qualities that freed them within captivity, became virtues celebrated far beyond it. And yet, their influence isn't just on women. The courtesans inspired poets, painters, and playwrights who redefined Japanese art. They were the muses behind an entire aesthetic, the balance between beauty and melancholy, presence and impermanence. That lingering tenderness in modern Japanese design, the appreciation for fleeting moments, for cherry blossoms that fall at their brightest, that's Yoshiwara's fingerprint on culture. You find yourself walking down a quiet street that used to be the heart of the district. There's no gate anymore, no music, no parades. Only a small stone marker stands by the sidewalk, carved with fading kanji sight of Yoshiwara. Around it, the city rushes on, oblivious. Yet in the air, there's still a faint sense of theater, as if the ghosts of courtesans are watching, amused by the irony that they've become history's best storytellers. For a moment, you close your eyes. The city noise fades. You can almost hear the rustle of silk, the clack of wooden sandals, the low hum of a shamisen. The illusion returns, gentle and familiar. You picture the courtesans laughing quietly among themselves,